The gas station sat on a lonely stretch of highway, bathed in the flickering glow of tired neon signs. A few distant crickets chirped, and the occasional gust of wind rustled debris across the asphalt. The hum of fluorescent lights inside the station was the only real sound, until the low growl of motorcycles rumbled in the distance. A single woman stood by her vehicle, calmly refueling. The gas station attendant, a wiry old man, barely glanced at her, more focused on his magazine than anything else. Behind her, in the back of a rugged SUV, two sets of sharp eyes gleamed in the dim light, her dogs, alert and waiting. The atmosphere felt eerily still, the kind of quiet that made a person listen a little harder, sense a little sharper. And then, breaking the silence, came the unmistakable roar of approaching motorcycles. Riley Carter didn't flinch at the sound. Years of discipline and combat training had conditioned her against reacting to every little disturbance. She was used to noise, used to unpredictability. With a slight sigh, she glanced at her reflection in the car window. Calm brown eyes, a strong jaw, a face marked by the kind of experiences most civilians wouldn't understand. She adjusted the sleeves of her faded military-style jacket. The patches on her shoulder were long gone, but the spirit of a soldier still clung to her every movement. Riley had served multiple tours overseas, training and deploying K-9 units in some of the most hostile environments imaginable. Her dogs, Duke and Shadow, were more than just pets. They were warriors, bred for discipline, trained for battle. Duke, the larger of the two, had a thick coat of fawn-colored fur. His muscles coiled like a spring even when at rest. Shadow, leaner and darker, was the faster one, his piercing gaze scanning everything with near-predatory awareness. They were still, but never relaxed. This trip wasn't about work, though. Riley had packed up and hit the road to clear her head, to put some distance between herself and the city. She was on her way to visit an old military friend, someone who understood the kind of silence that crept in after the battles were over. She had thought this little gas stop would be uneventful. She was about to be proven wrong. The motorcycles rolled in like thunder, 5 of them, chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights, engines growling before cutting off one by one. The riders were exactly what Riley expected: leather vests, scuffed boots, and the kind of attitude that thrived on trouble. Leading the pack was Mac, a brute of a man with a permanent smirk that spelled trouble. His hair was slicked back, and his beard was thick, peppered with grey. He scanned the gas station like a predator surveying its hunting ground. His eyes landed on Riley. "Ain't that something?" Mac muttered, nudging the guy next to him. A little lady all alone at a gas station, dressed like a soldier. What are the odds? His crew chuckled, the kind of laughter that carried a mean edge. They watched her, waiting for a reaction. Riley didn't give them one. She finished pumping her gas, screwed the cap back on, and moved toward the driver's side. No hesitation, no second glance. That, of course, only made things more interesting for the bikers. "Hey now, don't be rude," Mac called out, stepping closer. "Ain't every day we see a lady with an army look. You one of them veterans." Silence. Mac grinned. "Oh, come on now. No need to be shy. We're just curious. Maybe you'd like to grab a drink with us." Riley opened the car door without answering. and that's when she heard the click of boots against asphalt, closer than before. "You ain't gonna say nothin'?" Mac asked, his voice still carrying that same amused tone, but with a challenge underneath. "That ain't very polite, miss." Riley's dogs tensed in the back seat. Duke let out a low, warning growl, deep and guttural. It was the kind of sound that cut through arrogance like a knife. Mac's smirk faltered. His crew exchanged glances. "Oh," he muttered, chuckling to himself. "You got yourself some dogs back there. Huh." Riley finally turned her head, her gaze locking onto Mac's. "They're not just dogs," she said evenly. "They're trained military K9s, and they don't like trouble." The gang fell silent for a beat, sizing her up, weighing their next move. Then Mac laughed, a full, belly-shaking laugh. "Trained military dogs. Huh. You mean those little mutts in the back?" he sneered. "Come on, sweetheart. You expect us to be scared of a couple of overgrown puppies?" His crew chuckled, emboldened by their leader's bravado. One of them took a step closer, peering into the SUV's back window. "Big mistake." Duke lunged, his powerful frame slamming against the glass with a snarl that was nothing short of primal. His teeth bared, eyes locked onto the man like a target. The biker jumped back with a curse. "Whoa! Damn!" he yelped. "That thing's crazy." Mac's smirk twitched slightly. Riley exhaled slowly, maintaining her calm. She had dealt with men like this before. They always underestimated her, always thought they had the upper hand. She shut the car door and turned fully to face them. "You should back off," she said. Mac tilted his head, weighing his options, and then a cruel grin spread across his face. "Nah," he said. "I think we're just getting started." Mac's boots scuffed against the pavement as he and his gang sauntered toward Riley, the air thick with arrogance. The gas station lights buzzed overhead, casting their shadows long against the concrete. Riley remained steady, finishing up at the pump as if she hadn't even noticed them. But Mac wasn't the type to be ignored. Well, he drawled, hands in his pockets. "What do we have here? A lone soldier fueling up in the middle of nowhere? Kind of a bad place for a lady to be all by herself, don't you think?" One of his men, a wiry guy with a jagged scar across his cheek, let out a sharp laugh. "Maybe she ain't alone. Maybe she's got some big, tough army boys hiding in the back seat." Another biker, tall, with a beer gut stretching his leather vest, jerked a thumb at the SUV. "Oh, wait. She's got her little fur babies with her. What's with the mutts? You need them to protect you, sweetheart." The gang chuckled, their voices dripping with condescension. Riley exhaled slowly. She had seen men like this before. They thrived on dominance, always looking for someone to push around, someone to make feel small. Too bad for them. She wasn't that kind of person. She kept her focus on her task, giving them nothing. No reaction. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of the fuel pump clicking off, and that only made them push harder. Mac stepped closer, clearly annoyed that his words hadn't landed the way he wanted. He tapped a finger against the side of her SUV. "Come on now. Don't be shy. We're just being friendly." Riley finally turned her head, fixing him with a cool, level stare. "That's so. Her voice was calm, too calm. It threw him off for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "Yeah," Mac grinned, looking back at his men. "We're real friendly." Inside the SUV, Duke and Shadow had picked up on the shift in the air. Their hackles rose, low rumbles vibrating deep in their chests. Their instincts told them what Riley already knew. These men weren't here for conversation. One of the younger bikers, a wiry punk with a missing tooth, leaned closer. "Oh no, scary little puppies," he mocked, placing a hand dramatically on his chest. "What are they gonna do? Lick me to death?" The gang erupted in laughter, the sound grating and ugly. Shadow let out a snarl, his teeth flashing in the dim light. The laughter faltered. Riley allowed a small, humorless smile to touch her lips. "They don't lick," she said simply. Mac studied her, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. But whatever it was, it didn't stop him. If anything, it made him double down. "Man, I gotta see this," one of the bikers said, taking a bold step toward the SUV. His fingers drummed against the glass. Duke's reaction was immediate. He lunged at the window, his powerful body slamming against the glass with enough force to make it rattle. A deep, thunderous bark ripped through the air. The biker stumbled back, cursing. "Jesus!" The gang tensed, momentarily thrown off. Riley, however, remained perfectly still. "Step back," she said, her voice even. "Last warning." Mac recovered first, shaking his head with a smirk. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his tone mocking. "You don't give orders here." He gestured toward his men. "Take it up a notch." And just like that, the situation escalated. One of the bikers, a thick-armed brute named Kenny, stepped forward. His smile was lazy, but there was an edge to it. "Listen, girl," he said, reaching out. "No need to get all uptight. We're just having some fun." His fingers barely grazed Riley's shoulder. And then, in the blink of an eye, she moved. Before Kenny even knew what happened, Riley had his wrist twisted in an iron grip. In one swift motion, she turned, yanking him forward while pivoting on her heel. A sharp cry of pain escaped him as he was forced onto his knees. His arm wrenched at an unnatural angle. The gas station fell silent. For a moment, all that could be heard was Kenny's strained breathing and the distant chirp of crickets. Mac's expression darkened. Riley, still gripping Kenny's arm, leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "I told you to step back." Then, just as smoothly as she had taken him down, she released him. Kenny stumbled to his feet, cradling his arm, his face burning with humiliation. The bikers were still for a split second. Then Mac's smirk returned, but this time there was no amusement in it, just cold calculation. "Well now," he murmured, cracking his knuckles. "Guess we got ourselves a real fighter." The laughter was gone. Now, it was personal. Mac's pride was in tatters. The woman he had expected to mock and intimidate had just humiliated him in front of his own men. And worse, she had done it effortlessly. A dangerous silence hung between them. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Mac pulled out a hunting knife. The gas station lights gleamed off the blade's edge as he rolled it between his fingers. You think you're some kind of warrior. Ha! He sneered. Let's see how tough you really are. The bikers shifted, their postures stiffening. The time for jokes was over. Riley remained still, her muscles coiled beneath the surface, waiting. One of the bikers, a lanky, tattooed man with missing teeth, stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. You should have walked away when you had the chance, he muttered. They thought they had her cornered. They thought this would be easy. But Riley had already counted her exits. She had calculated every angle, every possible move. More importantly, she wasn't alone. Riley gave a single command, sharp and firm. Duke. Shadow. The response was immediate. The SUV door flung open, and Duke, a massive Belgian Malinois, shot out like a bullet. His powerful body collided with Mac before he could react, knocking him onto his back. The knife clattered to the ground. Shadow was only a heartbeat behind. The second K9 lunged at one of the bikers who had tried to circle behind Riley. The man let out a strangled yell as he was tackled, pinned beneath 100 pounds of trained muscle. Chaos erupted. Mac thrashed beneath Duke, desperately trying to push the dog off, but Duke had locked onto his arm, growling low and dangerous. The gang scrambled, their earlier bravado gone in an instant. One of them lunged for Riley, but she sidestepped effortlessly, twisting his arm behind his back and driving him into the pavement. Another biker tried to run. Shadow turned his head at Riley's sharp whistle and bolted after him, cutting off his escape in seconds. Screams of panic filled the night. The gang had picked the wrong fight, and now they knew it. Riley didn't lose her composure for a second. With precise, calculated commands, she ensured the K9S stayed in control. They weren't there to kill, only to subdue. Duke kept Mac pinned. His powerful jaws locked around the man's wrist, but not biting down hard enough to cause permanent damage. Shadow had his target on the ground, his teeth bared in a silent warning, daring the man to move. The rest of the bikers stood frozen, too terrified to interfere. Mac, his face pale and slick with sweat, wheezed out a shaky breath. Blood trickled from his arm where Duke had caught him, but it was nothing compared to the fear in his eyes. "Call them off," he gasped. "Call them off." Riley crouched beside him, her gaze level and unwavering. "You brought this on yourself," she said simply. Mac whimpered. The mighty leader of the gang was reduced to nothing more than a shaking coward. A distant wail of sirens broke through the night. One of the truckers parked at the gas station had witnessed everything and had already called the cops. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights bathed the parking lot as two squad cars skidded to a stop. Officers leaped out, weapons drawn, only to pause at the bizarre scene before them. A group of bikers lay sprawled across the pavement, some moaning in pain, others too shocked to move. A massive dog stood over one of them, growling lowly, and at the center of it all, Riley stood tall, calm as ever. With a simple word, she called off her dogs. "Duke, Shadow, heel." Instantly, both K9S released their captives and trotted obediently to her side, sitting at attention like nothing had happened. One of the officers, a seasoned sergeant, took in the sight of Mac clutching his bleeding arm and let out a low whistle. "Let me guess," he muttered, pulling out his cuffs. Mac and his boys picked the wrong fight. Again. Riley simply crossed her arms, saying nothing, as the officers began cuffing the gang. One of the younger cops approached Riley, clearly impressed. "What's your story, ma'am?" he asked. She gave a small, almost amused smile. "Just a woman passing through." The officer chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure you are." As the bikers were hauled to their feet, Mac shot Riley one last look, but there was no more arrogance, no more bravado, just fear, because now he knew he had never stood a chance, and he never would. The scene was a mess of flashing lights and quiet murmurs. The once proud bikers, who had swaggered into the gas station thinking they owned the place, were now reduced to shivering wrecks, sitting cuffed on the pavement as officers documented the situation. Riley stood off to the side, arms crossed, silent as one of the officers walked up to her with a knowing look. "Riley Thompson." The sergeant nodded. "I thought that was you." She gave him a neutral glance, neither confirming nor denying it. He smirked, pulling out a notepad. "Didn't think I'd see you again, but I guess trouble finds you no matter where you go." One of the younger officers glanced between them, confused. "Wait, you know her?" The sergeant chuckled. "Oh, yeah. Former Army K-9 handler. One of the best. Trained with special forces. If she wanted these guys dead, we'd be zipping them up in body bags, not slapping on cuffs." The younger cop's eyebrows shot up in shock. Riley shrugged. They made their choice. The officers took her statement, but it was mostly a formality. The security cameras had caught everything, the harassment, the threats. The moment Mac pulled the knife, there was no doubt she had acted in self-defense. As for Mac and his men, they sat in defeated silence, their arrogance gone. Even those who weren't injured avoided making eye contact. Mac's hands trembled as he cradled his injured wrist. His earlier bravado shattered. One of the officers leaned down next to him. "You just had to push it, didn't you, Mac?" No response. Just the hollow stare of a man who had learned the hardest lesson of his life. With the bikers being loaded into the squad cars, the attention slowly turned back to Riley, the gas station attendant, who had watched everything unfold with wide eyes, now looked at her differently. Before, there had been a hint of nervousness, an uncertainty about this lone woman with her two massive dogs. Now, there was nothing but quiet admiration. "Guess I owe you an apology," the attendant finally muttered. "Didn't think you'd hold your own against them." Riley simply gave a small nod. No hard feelings. A few truckers, who had remained in their rigs during the chaos, stepped forward. One of them, a burly man with a thick grey beard, crossed his arms and gave her an approving nod. About time someone put those punks in their place. He grumbled. "They've been harassing folks at stops like this for months. Nobody did a damn thing, until you." Another trucker chuckled. "Not gonna lie, I thought they had you outnumbered. But when those dogs came out, phew, never seen a man turn white so fast." A ripple of laughter passed through the small crowd. One of the officers, the same younger cop who had been shocked by her background, shook his head in disbelief. "Remind me never to mess with a K-9 handler," he muttered. Riley allowed herself a small smirk. As the last of the bikers were shoved into the squad cars, Mac caught her gaze one final time, but there was no challenge left in his eyes. Just fear. Good. Maybe next time. He'd think twice before preying on the wrong person. With the chaos settled, Riley turned her attention back to her dogs. Duke sat patiently beside her, still on high alert, while Shadow sniffed at the air, his instincts keeping him cautious even as the situation de-escalated. She knelt down, running a hand over Duke's head. "Good boy." Then to Shadow. "You too." The dogs relaxed at her words, their loyalty unwavering. She opened the car door, gesturing for them to hop in. They obeyed instantly, settling into their usual spots. Standing up, Riley took one last look at the scene around her. The broken bikers, the flashing police lights, the strangers who had witnessed it all, now whispering to each other about the woman who had taken down an entire gang without breaking a sweat. She shook her head to herself. Just another night. Sliding into the driver's seat, she started the engine. The deep hum of the vehicle rumbled beneath her, the sound familiar, grounding. With one last glance in the rearview mirror, she saw Mac, now slumped in the back of a squad car, staring at nothing. Riley shifted into drive. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, another chapter of her life waiting to unfold. And with that, she disappeared into the night. She never looked for trouble, but trouble always seemed to find her, and when it did, it never ended well for the other side. Mac sat in a cold jail cell, his hands cuffed in front of him as he stared at the floor. The swelling in his face hadn't gone down, and every movement sent sharp pain through his bruised ribs. His so-called brothers weren't faring any better. A few had managed to get bail, but most were stuck just like him, waiting to face charges that would follow them for a long time. Assault, disturbing the peace, destruction of property. Some even had outstanding warrants from other incidents. The gang that once strutted into truck stops with their chests puffed out and their egos unchecked had been reduced to a joke. The same truckers who once avoided them now laughed about how a lone woman with 2 dogs had taken them down in minutes. It wasn't just about the beatdown. It was about the fear they had felt, the raw, undeniable realization that they had messed with the wrong person. Mac clenched his jaw. He'd always prided himself on being the toughest guy in the room. But now, whenever he closed his eyes, all he could see was those piercing eyes and the flash of teeth from her dogs. And the worst part, he knew he'd never forget it. A few states over, Riley finally reached her destination. The air smelled different here, cleaner, calmer, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few days. She pulled into a small driveway, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. Before she even had a chance to kill the engine, the front door swung open. A man in his early 50s, with graying hair and a sharp gaze, stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. The moment he saw her, he shook his head with an amused sigh. "Let me guess, another run-in with trouble?" Riley smirked, leaning back in her seat. "You know me. Trouble finds me." Her old friend chuckled, stepping down from the porch as she opened the car door. Shadow and Duke hopped out, stretching their legs before trotting up to the man, tails wagging in recognition. "Still got these 2 watching your back. Ha!" he mused, giving the dogs a pat. "Always," Riley said. She grabbed her bag from the back seat, slinging it over her shoulder. "So," her friend said, leading her inside. "How bad was it this time?" She just smiled, shaking her head. Let's just say some people learned a very valuable lesson. As the door shut behind them, the road outside remained empty, stretching endlessly into the unknown, and somewhere out there, trouble was waiting. But when it came knocking again, Riley would be ready. She always was. The end.